Unlike a lot of other software applications, you can't just open Peachtree and start putting in accounting transactions. Actually, that's not exactly true. Let me explain. In Peachtree, it needs to know a little bit about what your company is and how it operates so that it can create and configure itself to work the way that you need it to. In Peachtree, we call this creating a company file, and it's the first step. In this chapter, we'll take you through a little bit of preliminary information so you can make sure you have all of the information together that you'll need in order to create a company file that's most appropriate so you can get to work with Peachtree. As the Boy Scouts so wisely say, it's best to be prepared, and preparing to create a company file is no exception. You need to gather a little bit of information so that when you start to create the file on the computer, you have the information you need and you don't spend time running around trying to find it at that point. First of all, you need some basic business information, things like your formal company name. Now, that isn't the one that it goes by in conversation that everybody thinks of, which may be a shortened version, but the full legal name. You also need to know what your business entity type is, and if you have a tax or employee ID number, a TIN, or an EIN, you should know that as well. You also need to select a start date for the accounts in Peachtree. Now, that could be as of today, it could be the start of next month, it could be last month, or you could go all the way back to the beginning of the year. But it is a decision that needs to be made. So records in Peachtree will be accurate as of what date. We also need to have most current details about some of the transactions that are going on. For example, you should have bank, loan, and credit card statements. That way you can get your balances and even add in some entries if you need to. You also should have any current bills that you owe or your accounts payable, and money that's due to you or accounts receivable. Hopefully you have more AR than you do AP. If you have any current inventory, you should take a current inventory, make sure it's accurate, so that can be entered. And then again, any employee, customer, vendor, and product lists, as well as lists of assets like furniture, computer equipment, or vehicles. It sounds like a lot, and we want to have it all together when we first get started so we can have a good start to our file. There are also some accounting decisions that you have to make. Will you be using cash or accrual accounting methods? What accounting periods will you use? What posting method do you want? While many of these settings can be changed in the software later, it's always a good idea to be accurate as soon as possible. Also, then you don't have to go back and change things and possibly forget to change them, and then you have bad data. The most important thing, though, is that the accounting method and the periods cannot be changed once the file is created, so you absolutely have to make sure those are correct. When we talk about business entities, this is something that you and or your partners and or your attorney and your bookkeeper or your accountant have probably discussed. What kind of business entity are you? If you're brand new and you're a small business, you may be a sole proprietor. Actually, there are some rather large businesses that are sole proprietors. The main difference here is that they file a Schedule C with personal taxes, and the person is not separate from the business. This is also sometimes called a DBA. In other words, in the eyes of the law and the IRS, they really are the same person or the same entity, they're just using different names. A partnership is also something you've probably heard of. They file tax form 1065, and partnerships are common for law firms, professional associations like medical partnerships, those types of things. And this, of course, affords a little bit of special protection, especially when it comes to liability. The new player on the field is an LLC, or a limited liability company. It's actually been around for a while now, but it is a relative newcomer and is very, very popular. It's popular because it's a happy medium between being a sole proprietor or being a corporation or a partnership. You get to still claim things on personal taxes, or at least you can do that, but you also have all of the legal protections. So if the company gets sued, the owners or the partners don't get sued. When you have an LLC, you might file a Schedule C, or an 1120, an 1120S, or an 1165. They're kind of in this never-never land where they're a blend of a lot of different things. You'll also probably have an attorney or a bookkeeper or an accountant help you make the choice and fill out the paperwork to become an LLC. Then, of course, we get to the big kahuna, as they say, a full corporation. You can either be a C Corp or an S Corp. They file tax forms 1120 and 1120S. This is what most of us think of when we think of as business, where the business is separate. The primary difference with a corporation is you no longer have owners. Instead, you have shareholders. Even if you're a small business, maybe you're owned by yourself and your spouse, you may be the only shareholders, but you still, when you create the corporation, have to say which one of you gets which percentage of the shares and have them distributed. Corporations, of course, have the utmost of legal protection where the corporation truly is separate from all of the shareholders. If something happens to the corporation, whether it be something as far as a liability lawsuit or bankruptcy, that is supposedly going to be very separate from the shareholders. Even though sometimes people do get personal guarantees, really the basis of a corporation is that separation of responsibility. You need to make a choice on this business entity, and it probably should have already been done before you came to Peachtree. If you need some help, please ask for it from either an accountant or an attorney. The next thing we need to decide is what type of accounting period do we want. This is something that some people don't even think about. They just go with a regular old calendar year. It starts on January 1st, it goes through December 31st, just like the regular tax year probably does. But you do have a choice. When you're working with a business, you can use a fiscal year, and a fiscal year could be the same as the calendar year, but it also could have different types of periods, in other words, more than 12 months, or it could start in the middle of the year. Remember that your accounting periods cannot be changed once they're selected and in the company file. Peachtree gives you the option of having 12 monthly periods, and you can choose a starting month, or accounting periods that don't match the calendar. Now that could be a custom fiscal year structure. For example, you might break your fiscal year into quarters, or you might have 13 4-week periods instead of 12 periods that are varying numbers of days. This again is something that should be carefully considered, and if you need some advice, there are plenty of places you can get it, as well as some information that's good on the internet. Something you may have not thought of before at all is a posting method, especially if you've never used electronic software. This comes down to how Peachtree processes or transfers transactions from individual journals to the general journal, and Peachtree has several options. Actually, it has 2 options. You can do real-time posting or you can do batch posting. Real-time posting posts to both as you enter and save transactions, so it's immediate. As soon as you create an invoice, for example, it's posted. As soon as you create a payment, it's posted. Batch posting saves transactions and posts them in a group when it's initiated. Now, a lot of times larger companies will do this. For example, they will post things on Friday afternoons. This does give people an opportunity to look at the transaction journals, for example, or the registers and make sure that everything looks right before things are actually posted. Honestly, in my experience, most smaller companies usually work with real-time posting, and since we're using electronic software, it really is the most recommended method that I see, at least in my type of work. You can switch methods at any time, so if you're not sure which one you need, maybe you can try one, and then you can always switch it later. There's no requirement that you have to stick with the one you choose, unlike a couple of our other decisions we've had to make. We've talked a little bit about the chart of accounts, and you understand what's there. But when it comes to this part, we're talking about creating the company file. This is going to be the names that are used to classify the transactions that appear, and we want them to appear appropriately on our financial statements. Now, even though there are a lot of accounts that are always the same, sometimes they're a little bit different based on the type of business. So Peachtree has a couple of options. First of all, you can set them up using a simplified chart of accounts, which is just what it sounds like, kind of a bare minimum, if you will. Or you can set up using an extensive chart of accounts. Both of these allow you to select sample types of industries. So you can say you're in retail or you're a beauty salon or a bakery, something like that, and it will give you the recommended types of accounts you can have. You also can copy your accounts from an existing Peachtree company if you're moving over from a different company or you have something that you want to copy. And you also can convert from another type of accounting program, such as QuickBooks or even Microsoft Accounting. And lastly, you can build your own. Now, I don't really recommend building your own. I think any one of these other options is going to be better. Even if you know that you're going to have to do a lot of modifications, it's usually easier to let a computer create the list of accounts, and then you can go in and modify, delete, or create new ones as necessary. Of course, actually creating a company file is not that big of a deal if you use the wizard. Now, I have to admit to you, as an instructor and as a curious person, I've often thought, I wonder if I could create a new company file all on my own. And the answer is yes, I could, but then I also say, why would I want to? Peachtree is going to do so much of the work for me that it actually saves not only hours, but possibly even days. And if you're not familiar with accounting, it can create things that you may not have even thought of. So let's go ahead and create a brand new company account. And I'm thinking we'll do this for a spa that is opening, which is called Irlandessa Spa. I could go to the File menu and click New Company. I also could use the keyboard shortcut Control-N, or if you happen to have the Peachtree welcome screen, you also can simply click where it says Create a New Company. It gives you a little screen that tells you what's going to happen, kind of all the different things that you're going to go through. And you have me to guide you through that, so I'm not going to have you read it. I'm just going to go ahead and click Next. Naturally, one of the first things it needs to know is the company information. So I'm going to enter just a little bit of information about Irlandesa. You will notice that some things are required. You need to have a company name. You need to have a business type. Some of the address, phone number, those types of things are actually not required. So while it is recommended that you put in as much as possible, so you don't have to do it later, it isn't required. Let me go ahead and do just a little bit of data entry, then I'll click on Next. For the business type, I'm going to enter that this is a limited liability company. And then let's go ahead and click on Next at the bottom of the screen. Now we need to select a method to create our company. And you might be saying, well, I thought I had already done that. I'm in the wizard. Well, there are different options even within the wizard. First of all, you can use a sample business type that closely matches your company. And I love how Peachtree tries to guide you by saying this is what most companies do. They don't want to confuse you with options. The second is to copy settings from an existing Peachtree accounting company. If you had multiple companies that did similar types of things, or maybe you were managing multiple companies, maybe you were doing their books, that would be a great idea to copy the settings instead of having to recreate them all from scratch. You also can convert a company from another accounting program, or you can build your own chart of accounts. And they say that that's designed for accountants and advanced users only. And I really agree with that. There are so many accounts that need to be created. It's just the number of them that makes it difficult, not to mention having to know which types of accounts you need. We're going to go ahead and stay with the very first one. I think it's a good recommendation, so we'll click Next. Now we need to select a business type. On the left-hand side, we can see different types of businesses. And at the very top is a category called Simplified Types. And then it's followed by Detailed Types. So they are just what they sound like. Very simple things like just a generic service company is possible. Or you can scroll down and see if maybe your business is a little bit more clearly identified in the list. We're talking about a spa, and they actually don't have an entry for a spa, but a beauty salon is close. Some of the services will be similar. Once I select a type of business from the left, then I get to see the sample chart of accounts on the right. If you're not familiar with what this might include, or if you're not sure if you've chosen the right business, go ahead and take a look through here and see if they look right to you. Things like petty cash, cash on hand, and checking accounts, those aren't very interesting. Almost everybody's going to have those. But then I can see that there are accounts for supplies inventory. And then I actually get into sales. Sales for hair services, sales for manicure services, sales for reselling products. This sounds like it's going to fit right into what my spa needs. So I'll go ahead and keep that, and I'll click Next. This is one of those important screens. We have to choose our accounting method. Accrual, which is what most people do. Remember, that's going to be that more accurate type of look, even though some people think it's not quite as easy. Or you can go with the cash method. Notice at the bottom, and I kind of wish they would put it in red, but it does say in bold, this cannot be changed after your company is created. This is kind of one of those speak now or forever hold your peace. Instead, it's make the right choice or you're going to have to recreate the file. We do know that we want to have accrual, so we'll click Next. And now we need to choose a posting method. Again, you can change the posting method at any time, so this one isn't a critical decision, but I think most people are going to do real-time posting. That means that each transaction is going to post as it's entered and saved, as opposed to batch processing. That's when you do it as a group. It is helpful to know that if you do batch posting, at least Peachtree will prompt you at certain times. For example, if you're trying to run certain reports and it knows that those need to be as up-to-date as the transactions it's holding, it might suggest that you post everything before you run the report. Real-time sounds like a good deal to me. Let's click Next. And now we get to choose our accounting period structure. Choose from one of the two, a 12-month period or something that doesn't match the calendar months. I'm going to go ahead and choose that second option just so I can click Next and show you what this option gives you. If you say I'm not going to use months, then they say, well, okay, tell us how many accounting periods you have. As I mentioned earlier, a very popular one is actually to have 13 accounting periods broken into 4-week periods. There may be other options though. For example, you could just do quarterly. So this is an important thing to choose, and then you also want to enter the start date. I'm going to click back because I don't want to use kind of an odd accounting period, so I'm just going to go with just the good old 12-month. Click on Next. It does ask me what the first month of my fiscal year is. For most people, especially sole proprietors and probably some LLCs, it's going to be January, but a lot of corporations and partnerships have something other than that. Just make sure you choose the appropriate one. We're going to click Next one more time. And that's all we have to do. I know my finger's tired, but if that's the hardest thing I have to do, we're doing okay. Let me go ahead and click Finish and let Peachtree do its thing. Unfortunately, all accounting programs these days have to do a little bit of marketing about their services. This one happens to be bringing up one about credit cards. I'm just going to say okay to get rid of that for now. We can see that it's opening my Irlandessa Spa file. And after it brings up Peachtree in the background, it also is going to give me the Peachtree setup guide. This is actually a really good guide to help you along. It's not because you can't do this on your own, but it's just kind of a reminder. They recommend that you do things in the following order, that you first add customers, then jobs, then vendors, so on and so forth. And they do have hyperlinks to give you some assistance on how to do that. If you don't want to see this when you open your file, you can move down to the bottom left-hand corner, and there's a checkbox that says Don't Show This on Startup. And then I'll click Close on the right side. Say OK to exit the setup guide. And remember, you can always get that setup guide back by simply going to the File menu and choosing Setup Guide. So even if you turned it off, you're not completely lost without it. Here we have a perfectly created, pristine and clean Peachtree file for Irlandessa Spa. It only took a few minutes as long as we were prepared and knew the answers to some of those questions. A virtually painless process. Once your file is created, you should customize the chart of accounts. While the sample is good, it's very unlikely that it will be exactly what you need. You're probably going to have some accounts that you don't need that it includes, and some that you do want that it doesn't have. So you can add or remove accounts before going further in Peachtree so the transactions can be accurately categorized from the get-go. Let's go ahead and take a look at the chart of accounts that was created by going back up to Lists and choosing Chart of Accounts. This is very similar to the one that we saw when we were looking at the sample file, except this one, of course, is customized for a beauty shop. Now, we are actually running a spa, so our things are going to be a little bit different. What we can see, though, is that each of these does have an account ID. Unlike some other accounting programs, Peachtree does require account IDs. How you work with your IDs is up to you, to a point. It actually has a lot of flexibility. In addition to the accounting ID, you have a description. Description should be something that is, well, descriptive, and you also have a type, and that of course needs to conform to general accounting principles. You may have zero balances on the right hand side for all of these accounts at the moment, but that will change by either adding beginning balances or as you start to create transactions. We're going to go ahead and create a brand new account, but before we do so, I'd like to discuss account numbers. Peachtree is actually very liberal with the way it requires account numbers to be created. I'm going to tell you just some good rules that I found to be best practices, as well as what some of the rules are that Peachtree has. First of all, account numbers can be alphanumeric, and they can include symbols, except the asterisk, the plus sign, and the question mark. You cannot use those three. I recommend that you keep them alphanumeric, and actually I prefer numeric, but you can do alphanumeric and symbols. They can contain spaces, except they can't have spaces at the beginning or at the end. Now, my rule for that would be don't put any spaces in, but as far as Peachtree is concerned, you can use spaces except at the beginning and end. Remember that these account numbers are always going to be sorted alphabetically. So, instead of using numbers, you might need to use leading zeros because they're going to be sorted alphabetically, not numerically. I have a little sample here for you. By default, if you had 1, 10, 2, 273, and 3 as account numbers, that's exactly the order they would be sorted in. Because alphabetical sorting goes by the first digit first, so 1 and 10, then this first digit would be 2 and 273. You get the idea. Leading zeros prevents that problem. If I use leading zeros, then I get the sorting that I want. 001, 002, 003, 010, and 273. Oddly enough, for a Windows-based program, account numbers are case-sensitive in Peachtree. So in theory, you could have exactly the same account number in alphanumerics with upper and lower case. They could look like they're the same, but if they're mixed case, you can actually have duplicates. Be careful with that. My recommendation would be that if you're going to be using alpha characters, that you actually keep them all lowercase or all uppercase to be consistent. Usually all uppercase is more the standard. Above all else, just make your account numbers logical and be consistent. Find a scheme that works for you. For example, if you wanted everything in training to be in 40,000, that would be great. Maybe 40,100 was computer training, 40,200 was HR training, 40,300 maybe is compliance training. They all fall under the 40,000, and there's your consistency, and then you're using the hundreds and maybe even smaller digits in order to specify specific types of training in this case. Another thing that you might want to do is have the same type of account, for example, the same type of computer training, which would be 40,100, but you also want to track training for different locations or training for different departments. That's when you need to use something called masking. Masking simply controls sub-accounts that track what displays on reports. So all you need to do is divide your account numbers into segments. If computer training is 40,100, then all of my computer training will be 40,100. But maybe the California branch is 40,100-01, and the Oregon department is 02, and the New York is 03. So you're going to use the main account number in the first segment. That's kind of the common denominator. And then you can have locations or departments in the second segment, and you can even have more than 2 segments. Maybe the second segment is for department and the third segment is for location. You see how you can get very detailed here. If you're working with masking, you always want to set a -00 level for Peachtree to display the sum of all segments. Then in your reports you can say, I don't care about location or department, just show me all of my computer training. You're never going to enter transactions into the -00 account. In order to use masking, you have to make a little change in your file. It's not really that difficult. You just go to Maintain, Default Information, General Ledger, Account Segments. Right there you can type a description, and then you can set the length of each segment. In other words, what is the number of digits? For us, we were talking about having just 2 digits for our location or our department. You can also choose a separator. So you're going to have a -00 or a /00, an _00. You'll just then repeat those steps for each segment that you want. When you're finished, you click OK, and then you're ready to go and create your good account numbers. So now that we know a little bit more about account numbers, let's go ahead and create that new account. Now before I get in there, I just want to have you remember a couple of things. Remember, assets are things you own, but you don't sell. Liabilities are debts you owe to others. Equity represents the amount the owners have provided, and income and expenses are pretty self-explanatory. So those are the things we're going to have to be working with when we create an account. These can be broken down into further detail, which we'll see there's a lot of different kind of detailed versions of that, but those are the general categories. Also remember that accrual-based companies must have an accounts receivable and an accounts payable. That's kind of the definition of accrual. Cash-based companies may or may not have them. Sometimes they do so that they can show the aging for accounts that are unpaid, but they don't have to have them. Accrual companies, on the other hand, do. So don't try to remove those if you're accrual-based, and just be aware of those categories we were talking about. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at creating a new account in the chart of accounts. That's easy enough by simply going to the upper left corner of this window and clicking on New. The Maintain Chart of Accounts window is there, and we're going to now create a new account, which is very exciting. We can create a new ID, or we can just type in a description. Let's see what happens if I type in a description. What this is going to be is what actually shows up on the chart of accounts. So I'm going to do sales-aesthetic services, because we had manicures and hair care, but we didn't have things like makeup and facials. I'll go ahead and press Tab once that's typed in. And that brings me down to the account type. We'll use the drop down here. And here's where we start to see those accounts that we're becoming very familiar with. Accounts payable, accounts receivable, and don't forget you can scroll down. This happens to be an income account. If I had a beginning balance, I could click the Account Beginning Balances button. But actually, I choose not to do that because I certainly could do it here, but I prefer to do it in the General Ledger. The General Ledger just seems to be a little bit better place, a little bit easier to work with. So I usually choose to do those types of entries in the GL instead. Now let's get back up to that account ID. What do I want to do with the account ID? Well, this actually is going to be our account number, the one we've been talking about. So originally, I had some services already in place, and they already had some account numbers. The account numbers were actually 40,000, 100, and 200. I'm just going to continue that numbering scheme and make this 40,300. Now this is not the same as segmenting my numbers. This is still just one number. So when I see them in a list, they are all going to be displayed and they're going to be listed in alphabetical order, which will be 40,100, 40,200, 40,300. Segmenting is a little bit different, so don't get that confused with what we just did, which is just continuing a pattern, if you will, for the numbering. I'll go ahead and press Tab, and that gets rid of our drop down, and really that's all we have to do. Create an account ID, put in a description, choose an account type, and you notice the account ID and the account type are the two with asterisks. That means that they are required. If I wanted to go back and forth and see different accounts, I can use the Previous and Next button. And if I ever have one of these accounts that becomes inactive, maybe a service that I no longer provide, there is an inactive checkbox. The inactive checkbox will remove it from my list, but of course we can't delete it once it has transactions related to it. You'll also notice down at the bottom that we have some general ledger types of things. This again can be used, but we're not ready to do that yet. Now we're just creating the account. So all I need to do is come up to the top, click Save, and then I'll close. This brings us back to our chart of accounts. So I can create as many new accounts as I want, following my account numbering scheme. I also can double-click an account to pull it up and make modifications, which I can do at any time. And if there are accounts that I don't need and I haven't used, then I can go ahead and delete those. For example, when I look at our cash accounts, we have checking accounts and other kinds of accounts, a savings account, and then they have this one called Special. Well, I'm never going to use a special bank account. So I'm going to double-click to open this. And then in its toolbar, I'm going to click the Delete button. It asks me if I'm sure I want to delete it, and I'll say yes. If that account had any transactions related to it, I would not be able to delete it. I could only make it inactive. So as you can see, working with the chart of accounts is not difficult really. You just need to know a little bit about what these account types are. You need to know what types of accounts you need, how to go in and create consistent numbering and good naming, and then you can always modify or make them inactive if you need to later on. With that, I'll go ahead and close out the Maintain Chart of Accounts window, and I'll also close out the account list. We've been able to create a company file as well as modify the chart of accounts to work exactly the way that we need to for our particular business and the way that we do business.